Are we live?
Yes.
We're going on. Good morning, everybody. How's all going?
Good.
That's good. It's my wonderful pleasure to be here with you this morning. My name is Byami Williamson. I'm a Ualio man. My people come from northwest New South Wales, up in a little community called Garuga. If you, in your mind, if you look at, if you can picture the Queensland-New South Wales border, we're halfway along there, but just on the New South Wales side, so we're only 30 kilometres from Queensland. So it's lovely to be here with you all, really excited to have this yarn with Uncle Rodney. Just starting by acknowledging country and acknowledging, the traditional owners of this land, and just acknowledging as Uncle Archie always said, the spirits in the land and the spirit of the old people and the ancestors remain here. So that's a bit my introducing myself. Pass Uncle Rodney to introduce himself.
Thanks, Jeremy. It's great to be here today, and thanks for those that could come along. Wawa, thank you. Duma, thank you and hello. It's good to be at country, someone else's country, and pay respect, as you've touched on, to them and their ancestors. And I think to the topic of what we're talking about today is extremely complex, and the breadth of where the conversations can go technically, scientifically, but most importantly from our conversation is, what is the cultural element, discussion and need around, I think for us as people to be now the givers of fire, as opposed to when there's the necessity to be firefighters, the fighters of fire.
Great, thank you. So, unfortunately, Uncle Dave isn't able to be here, so it's just Rodney and I. So we're going to do this as a bit more of an informal yarn between two people who've had a little bit to do with cultural burning over the last few years, but from really different spaces. So maybe we'll just open the conversation by reflecting on how we've come to this space, like the kind of work that we've been involved with, and a bit about our story. So maybe pass to you first, Unc. So yeah, just sort of how have you been involved with cultural burning over the years? How did you come to it, and what is it that you do now?
Yeah, so I think that for many of us, the First Nations people, we have that intersection in our culture and our upbringing, and that nurture. And that is so, I think, different for all of us as people. And we're unique as individuals, and we have curiosity, and we crave things, we have hungers. For me, unusually, science I always found as this interesting thing that brought a bit of the unseen world into reality through numbers and experiments and all of those sorts of things. And I think, again, unusually at an early age, I thought, well, this is not immediately my culture, but it's mysterious sometimes, like my culture. And so I was fortunate. My mother's oldest brother was a practitioner of cultural fire, learnt from older people, and he was able to continue for his life to be a practitioner from being involved in rural, regional areas in the agricultural context where fire has been applied through fine fuels, so the burning of stubbles and grasses, weed management. And then for a large part of his life, he worked for the regulator of railways regionally, and so was quite frequently giving fire to these reserves, these annexes through country that have been heavily modified, and caring for country and healing country. And so to be exposed to those things and be curious as a younger person, you have this really incredible fond sort of memory. And I guess I've gone on pretty chaotically in my life, craving knowledge and doing different things. And then ultimately I landed in government as a specialist around cultural heritage and the impacts of fire. Fortunately did a lot of training with the experts scientifically in fire, and come to know Dr. Kevin Tolhurst, which is probably the most prominent fire scientist in Australia, if not the world, and sadly he's not long passed away. So well, for me, maybe it was a bit of like blending you know, this scientific stuff going on, and the beauty of the cultural element and our people being empowered in fire. So, you know, that's where it unusually landed me to you know, contribute to the discussion in fire.
Great, thank you. And it's really interesting to hear you talk, and particularly kind of the connecting of, I guess, modern Western conceptions of science and scientific methodologies and scientific knowledges with kind of, you know, reflections and how you've grown up as an Aboriginal kid and into adulthood and into manhood. I think there's probably quite a few similarities in the way that I came to it as well. So you know, I wasn't one to sort of grow up sort of lighting fires and a pyromaniac as a kid or anything, but through university, I was studying in environment, in geography in particular, and I kind of got interested in Aboriginal ranger programs, and through sort of university education started reading about ranger programs and started reading about kind of cultural burning. And then at university I studied, did a few courses in fire ecology, so got broadly familiar with like the geography of fire as a service, as an ecosystem service, how it provided, how it kind of interacted with the natural environment, different pressures and different pressures on it. And yeah, I became really intrigued by it. Fortunately, after I studied the physical geography of fire, I spent some time with ranger groups. I studied at ANU in Canberra, so I worked with some ranger programs. There was one big ranger program in the ACT who worked through Parks and Conservation Services there, Murrumbung Yarramurra Rangers, or Murrumbung for short. And then I was also fortunate enough to get up to Borroloola in the Gulf of Carpentaria in the Northern Territory. There were two ranger groups up there, the Liantha Woodiata Sea Rangers, which operate over kind of the Sir Edward Pilu archipelago of islands, and also the Wanyagawa Rangers, which operate over a couple of really big land trusts in the Northern Territory, and also over into the border as well, border of Queensland. So across all of those three ranger groups, so one operating in the ACT and up into the alpine areas, the Savannah Rangers being Wanyagawa, and also the Island Rangers, Liantha Woodiata, they all burned. And I just found it fascinating that across such different geographies, such different land and seascapes, in very different places of the country, all like burning fire was such a central part of everything that they did. It was part of the yearly cycles of work, yearly cycles of the environment. And so I became really, really interested about what it was about this thing, fire, that, you know, our people continue to maintain, and was such a core part of the work we do, that these ranger groups were doing, even now in contemporary times. But there were, through that, all of them, whilst all of them, you know, conducted cultural burning, planned for it, had the ability to do it, they all had kind of challenges as well, systemic barriers that prevented them from doing the burning to the fullest extent in a way that they wanted to, completely. So maybe it's a good juncture to come back to you, Unk. What are some of the real kind of barriers or challenges to cultural burning that you've found, and how is it through your mob that have been able to kind of overcome a lot of those barriers, or are there still barriers that really inhibit you? Yeah.
I think one of the things that we have to do first in having a useful presence as people, as First Nations people, as traditional owners, is to work around the regulatory systems, work within the regulatory systems that will be of a benefit to us, healing us as people, and can we be sophisticated enough to understand that our contributions need to be useful and seen positively by the wider community. Now, we're a minority in our own sort of homeland. So then, that's extremely challenging for any section of society, community that is a minority. And so the responsibility for us as a people, even as a burden, is just so great. And we've got to frame our mind now so constructively and positively that we aren't stuck in a state of trauma in our history of disadvantage. And so tomorrow, I think, oh, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do things. So, that's probably, for us as Jar Jar Wurrung, been a really key thing for us as a people. And then it's understanding this idea of, for us, Jandak We is cultural burning in language. It's the fire of country that we will describe it. And so we need to imagine, what does that look like for us? So it's aromatic, it's the aroma of the low intensity of us burning that allows now vapour, the aroma, the scents to come from country, so the plants. It's now a very useful indicator where fire, the flame, can be harmful to species, so it allows invertebrates, insects, an opportunity to seek refuge in litter. It allows larger mammals to scent, to feel and hear us of giving fire, for them to move within landscape. For us as now the givers of fire to sensibly understand the structure of country and its immediate need, and then how we do it gently so we don't allow fire to in a sense, become uncontrollable. And there is a nature of fire being uncontrollable, but we have a degree, I think, of connection to country, if we want to be intimate, to understand, well, where are these light touches we're going to give fire that'll move within landscape. So then we imagine that, and then we have this unhelpful, heavily modified landscape country that has dispersed agriculture, fences, roads. We're getting told by conservationists, environmentalists, that we need to treat natural places as wilderness, and humans were never there and they didn't do anything. So for us then, it's just really trying to work within that system. And what we've done reasonably successfully over the last 10 years is that we've adapted the regulatory system to suit us. So when we burn, it's our cultural values on why we burn, and we hold ourselves to account that we use those cultural values as the measures of our success. And these are the things scientifically and technically the state does. But what they're largely doing, ecological fire management's out here, and I largely believe what's inadvertently happened with ecological burning, they're actually stealing our responsibility as a people, as the carers of country, and framing it around, well, now we're smarter, we're cleverer, we can do this, we don't need you. I think that needs to be dismantled gradually as we go forward. But definitely what we've found is, based on our values, we can plan for fires in specific areas, give fire, and importantly, I think for climate change and all these other conversations you could have, reduce the fuel hazard, which is the way that the state and others describe the hazard, the loading of materials that are combustible, that can burn in an area. And so what we want is, there's the firefighting system, there's us as a people, the fire givers, that have a system, and increasingly I think we need to remodify landscape that is conducive to give fire. And two things that are really important, I think, when newcomers come to our country, consistently, repetitively, they documented multiple plumes of smoke. It's just a smattering in documentation, multiple plumes of smoke, multiple plumes of smoke. So what we want in our vision is to imagine and re-see multiple plumes of smoke in the landscape. That means that we're giving fire, but what we also want, Bahimi, because we're seeing terrible catastrophes, is that people aren't traumatised by seeing smoke and seeing fire. Actually, they feel safer. They feel at last, country speaking to people, you're safe, community's safe, everyone's safe, because we're giving fire and we've got some control.
Yeah, thank you. There's a lot in that response, and I'm
Sorry, I
trying
talked
to.
too long,
No,
didn't I?
no, it's fantastic, and I'm just trying to. I was listening to you, trying to, take in and absorb the various things you were saying, because the question was around barriers, and so what I heard were things like land use, how you mentioned kind of agriculture, but also just forested areas, protected areas. You've got urbanisation, you've got valleys that have been dammed. So you've got this radical transformation of the land in an image that is not of our ancestors creating. So, land use is a barrier. You touched on the regulatory environment, so laws and policies that are more geared to fire suppression, and obviously it's tied over with land use, but that kind of create barriers exist in trying to overcome that. You mentioned really interestingly like ecologists or environmentalists, and particularly the concept of wilderness, this idea of untouched landscape, whereas if you're going in and modifying and cultivating different landscapes, well, then you're kind of interfering with the natural systems, which is kind of shown to be, quite damaging for Indigenous livelihoods and being connected to the land. And that's kind of a larger philosophical barrier as well they're trying to overcome. You've mentioned previous catastrophes in the landscape and the trauma associated that with kind of communities, regional communities. So the fire history and the fact that people have been removed from land have created these really highly combustible, unsafe landscapes. And so I know there would be a lot of anxiety, particularly the first time you go in and strike a match and try to get some good fire back into the landscape. It's a bit unknown because it's, fuel loads are quite high, and it's been a long time since a good fire has been put into there. So all of these kind of barriers exist. So I find it just so wonderful that Aboriginal people and communities, organisations are at the forefront of really overcoming these in really, really innovative ways. So maybe just reflecting on some of the successes that you've had for your mob in reinstating cultural burning. What are some of the real things that you've kind of been, I guess, really proud of personally, but also as a group? Like what are 2 or 3 things that come to mind when thinking about the success of your group in bringing cultural burning back into country?
I think the respectful nature that we've seen around the system and how it's oppressed us as a people, and I guess how we've, not immediately adapted ourselves, but we've used the system, we've adapted that to service our needs, and for the regulator to see some comfort in our capability as a people, that instills a lot of pride when you think, okay, maybe your values aren't immediately aligned with my values, but when you see the respect that's been afforded to us as a people by our achievement, and then you start to see alignment of values, or people adopting sort of our values and ways of doing things behind me. I think that's really, I'm so proud of that. It's inspiring now for the younger people to have more younger people that, a lot of us can be against the system and we want to fight the system, and, we're at war with the sort of the system, but, don't give in to it, but, see the importance of having some goals and aspiring in your life in mainstream education system that you can utilise to your advantage. That's important for a lot of our kids and our mob to do that. So to see better outcomes for my mob in that area, statistically and otherwise, and participation now in career and workforce, I see that's amazing. Just in this fire context, because the other things we frame culturally around this is not the simplicity of the term of a hunter-gatherer society, but you have a key responsibility to get up before the sun each day, to go forth and get sustenance and maintain culture and do things that you can keep yourself, but keep your mob, your family and your community. So to see some of my mob now actually saying, oh, this is actually how culture relates to me having a job and having to be there at 8 a.m, knock off and set aside some of the difficulties we have in a family because this is the way I hunt and gather today. I need to get income and money. So we're seeing these amazing things for our mob. And fire is just one area that's providing the opportunity for us as a people.
It's fantastic. So one of the things that I've, come to learn as an individual, as an Indigenous researcher, as an Indigenous scholar, but perhaps most importantly, as a father, I've got a 5 and a 2-year-old at home, and I've had some wonderful moments of clarity in being and interacting with my kids and sort of talking to them and teaching them. And I remember one time when my son was born and he's starting to walk, and I was having a conversation with my wife, and she's like, "Oh, you need to, bring him up. He's a boy. He's got to grow up and become a man, and you need to teach him about all of this stuff." And then I was kind of going, I wasn't taught that stuff. I had an absent father. I was, So it was an interesting question posed to me at that time of like raising this young boy into become a proud kind of Aboriginal man. And then I started to think about like larger processes of colonisation, and I kind of learnt in a moment that one of the things colonisation has done to our people is really robbed us of self-confidence. You can't kind of go through what our people have been through without having your confidence in who you are as an individual, as a family, as a community, as nations of people, severely dented. And one of the things that I love about this space and being in caring for country and cultural burning in particular is when you get out with people, as you were describing, and you talk, you see people operating, you see people being on the land, you can see just sort of the confidence that they carry that's kind of being rekindled, and connection with country, and in particular using fire. There's something in it that builds self-confidence that has been severely degraded and eroded over 200 plus years. And it's one of the reasons why I absolutely love this space and love being in it, because you step into these spaces, these caring for country spaces, and you see people who are happy, people who are healthy, people who are vibrant, who are joyful, who are gleeful, and who are really, really strong culturally. And all the while, they're looking after, this wonderful place. They're looking after the plants, they're looking after the animals. So, as well as kind of being quite, having kind of the macho out there with the racos and creating containment lines and fencing and putting it like it's hard. Like the thing about cultural burning is, whilst it is, I feel like there's a lot of romanticism involved in cultural burning. When you get out and do it, they are long days, they are hard days, they are hot days, they are full on, and they are physically exhausting, but as well as kind of that, quite at times, macho way of working and being out and using your body in those ways. The gentleness and the caring, like the fires don't burn, they kind of caress the landscape and they kind of move through it and gently touch different parts of the environment. And it's a wonderful, beautiful thing to see Aboriginal people, especially young people, out doing this stuff, plying their trade, and holding these really kind of divergent spaces. So it's really amazing to hear you sort of talk about how cultural burning, how caring for country is providing a way to reinstill self-confidence, to rebuild the self-confidence of our groups, and also, importantly, of our young people as well, because that's what they're growing up with, and they've got a real strengths-based relationship with their culture, which is not something, unfortunately, it's not something that many of our elders have had, thinking about the early and mid-1900s and what people have gone through. I'm not sure if any of that's kind of resonating.
It's kind of cool what you're saying. Then I think what's unique with fire as a form of activity, you know, I've said before, it's a tool to be applied, so it's about gardening the environment. And for us, we use the word gardening with environment because, you know, it suggests, it confirms, you know, a human interaction and involvement. And then by your design, by your involvement, you're tending to country, you're moving stuff. Some species become more prominent, some species might be less by your design, your active management. That's what we need as people. But with fire, I think there's such a breadth of sensory stimulus. You know, I spoke earlier about the sense, the aroma. In a sense, there's an audio, and with different things burning. If you can connect to Wi Murub, the spirit of fire, now you're stimulated by the crackling of the way that materials are combustionable. There's a visional element. There's almost a caressing element in terms of the way that wind moves with fire. So you look at the way that the smoke moves, you can look at the way that a flame bends, you can walk around it and feel the heat from the fire. There's that much going on. I don't think in all forms, perhaps, of human existence, there's been something that we're more curious about than fire. And it's so uniquely us as First Nations people and as in Australia. You know, if I want to suggest things to people, we've been robbed of this. It's healing for us as a people, and we know if there's any country, continent in the world that can sort of lead by example and show others around climate change, we can do something ancient here. We can reintroduce something ancient that the ancestors taught us, and they want us to be practitioners. So I just think it's so stimulating, fire. Above all other things, you can be a chemist and immerse yourself in, you know, the oxidisation reactions of combustible materials. You can be an ecologist and look at the effects on invertebrates. You know, you can look at so many areas around this, but the simplicity, the beauty of this is empower us and our people that we should be able to go out on every day that you should or could or would burn, and you give fire to country. Like, that will secure us, I think, to be safer, to be healthier, and to be uniquely us again.
It's one of the things that I've always found about cultural burning as well is, well, not even cultural burning, just like fire in general. No matter what walks of life people come from or what they do for a living, no matter their age, everyone is just curious about fire. There's something so fundamentally intrinsic about the human condition that fire is something that just intrigues us all. It's a mystery, it's a threat, but it's our friend. It keeps us warm, gives us life. And I think it's so wonderful. And certainly I'm very proud to be part of a people who have these such strong ancient traditions of fire. And I think that you're exactly right. In an increasingly combustible world, and in context of global of climate change, you know, perhaps the solutions and innovation lie in our deep past. So maybe we can harness that and step into the future, drawing from that. So I'm curious to ask, considering that, you know, where, in your opinion, using cultural burning and applying fire more comprehensively in the landscape when it's safe to do so, how does that respond or fit into the challenges we all face with the changing climate, with an increasingly unsafe environment and unsafe climate? Where's cultural burning in the larger response to climate change for your mob and your country?
Yeah, so I think in the longer term, the longest term, and maybe we think centuries out, you know, and hopefully, you know, our children, our descendants of us today are still around and building upon, you know, our strategies and approaches today that are practical and useful. I think for us as a people, it's a bit of like we've got some sort of recipe and we believe it's going to contribute to success. It mightn't be ultimately the only solution, but in our belief, it's going to be a significant contributor to wellness of climate, of people and of country. So I think now we're persistent, consistent. We stay the course, we just keep working, having greater friends and allies around us as people that instill more pride in us, and we celebrate our collaboration and just stay the course. I think there's, as you touched on earlier when we were having a chat before today, there's so many nations around the country, that are trying to empower themselves and reconnect and give fire that will be a benefit. The alternative is, and I think we were saying this earlier, okay, as citizens, as society, taxpayers, whatever, we just keep putting our hands in our pockets and, more aircraft, bigger aircraft, more retardants, more chemicals, more fuel reduction burns, in quoting Dr. Kevin Tolhurst earlier. In the last 6 years of his life, the defining moment, the light bulb went on. Oh, Indigenous fire is the solution. He's one of the greatest minds nationally, if not internationally, and he realised that all their data around hazard reduction, fuel reduction, burning, within 3 years, the same quantity degree of hazard is present in the landscape. So, for my mind, I think for that all that great effort, there's a flaw in that method. If now you're a slave to that method and you're having to go back every 3 years, or excuse yourself that you can't go back in 3 years to again try and reduce that hazard, when you've got towns and cities and societies living in landscape that need another solution. And I just think we're at no loss to give us an opportunity in this, and let our grandchildren and great-grandchildren judge us, on what we're doing today. And I'm pretty damn sure that they'll be impressed by all of us societally taking these leaps of faith to do something outside of the box when we know the box has got a few things wrong with it.
Absolutely. It's certainly. I think there's been a few obviously massive disasters, massive kind of bushfires that have really challenged previous thinking around the nature of bushfires, the nature of fire in the Australian landscape. I'm thinking in particular about the 2003 bushfires in Canberra that smashed into the ACT. They were really significant because the old metric for measuring bushfire risk, like where the arrow goes and you've kind of got the different fire threat and level. When for those of you who don't know, when they do that, they don't just kind of go out and have a look and go, oh, today looks like it's a high fire danger or medium. No, it's all calculated based on soil moisture, time since previous rain, temperature, wind, all this kind of thing. So they put it all together into this algorithm, and then it produces a number, and then that's what does it. So basically, and they've got a maximum threat level that they had. So that was where conventional bushfire thinking in Australia and the world was at, and then Canberra happened. And Canberra was really significant because it was the first time ever that metric failed, that algorithm failed, because the threat level went past what they thought was the worst possible case scenario. So Canberra 2003 really changed the game. But then they were like, oh, maybe that was just a freak event, something so cataclysmic, so out of this world that'll never happen again. And then 2009 Black Saturday bushfires did the same thing. And then the Blue Mountains bushfires a few years later did the same thing. And then we had 2019-20, and it did the same thing everywhere. And then all of a sudden, it's like climate change wasn't knocking on the door. Climate change kicked the door down and was in the room, and it's been in the room with us ever since. And that's where we are now. We're in this post-1920 landscape. where climate change is no longer out there, it's real, it's here, and people are really, trying to understand what the circumstances under which we find ourselves now, and our way out of it. And that's, I feel like, created the opportunity for Aboriginal people, because it appears that Western science, it's not that they don't have solutions, but they don't have all the solutions, and there's broad recognition for that, and there is broad understanding and recognition now that fire is an indelible part of the Australian landscape. You cannot remove fire from the landscape. Fire will always be in the landscape. It's a question of what kind of fire is in there and what's it doing. And I feel like that's something our old people always learnt from fire, observing it, watching it, growing with it, and sort of becoming quite symbiotic with fire in these lands as well. So, as well as people manipulating fire and using it, whether it's using it for cooking, using it for warmth, using it for ceremony, using it for hunting, using it to reduce risk in the landscape, fire's also a teacher. I've certainly learnt a lot from working with it, being around it for a while now. So a final question for you, Unk, before we open to some questions, if anyone's got any questions they'd like to ask. What has fire taught you?
Don't know how to answer that, actually. Probably a range of things. I touched on probably the immersive nature of the sensory stimulation around fire. But if I pull a cultural thread from that, I think for me, a family member, and I mentioned my mother's eldest brother, my uncle, earlier, he didn't realise at the time, I think, of his generation that he was really still being a practitioner. I think he was appreciative of the knowledge that was shared to him about being a giver of fire. Probably rarely had a sick day in his life, and he was out in regional Victoria on train lines, when things were a bit laborious and robust and what people needed to be doing. And look back on that experience for me as a younger person and those memories, I think it inspires you to do something yourself that's useful. And then as I got older, I feel then a degree of gratitude. I'm grateful for the experience, and then I can be mature enough now to think, well, we need to instill those types of experiences in younger people so that they inspire to do, I say sometimes, Lucy, great things, but I think it's okay to say to younger people, go out and do some great things, do something. I'm going on a little bit of a tangent, but don't let, us be slaves as much as I've got smart devices there, but, slaves to the smart devices. I think we need a balance in our lives to, do great things, be inspired. So, I think that's what fire has done for me that I probably didn't appreciate, understand, 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, thank you. When I was thinking about sort of fire and this larger cultural complex that Aboriginal people are embedded within and operate within, I was thinking about where does fire kind of fit in? It fits across multiple spectrums, and it fits, it's both within and outside of, and all of this kind of thing. But then, like I was describing the moment earlier, when it came to a realisation when sort of interacting with my family, with my boy and my wife. But in another one of those kind of moments, I realised that fire isn't a part of our culture. Fire is our culture, and you can think about it quite practically as well. I mean, the question of what is culture is can sometimes be an unhelpful question because it's kind of ubiquitous, it's everywhere, it's through everything, it's within us, outside of us, all around us. But you can understand this question of culture through fire. I mean, if you think about a campfire that people are sitting around, that I'm sure all of us at one point in our lives have sat around, what feeds the fire? What feeds the fire are the various kind of, logs and sticks and branches and stuff that you put on, so that's your kind of fuel. And you can think about it that socially and culturally as well. The languages we speak is perhaps quite a large log that you can put on fire. The dances we dance are another log. The food that we eat from our country is another log. Our families are another log. Our stories passed down from our old people is another log. So you kind of get all of these different parts of culture and you think about them as these logs on a fire. You put them all together, what have you got? You've got a raging kind of campfire that's so bright, that's so not just warm but hot. And you think about the project of colonisation through that process as well. What did they try and do? They tried to take languages, to remove that log from the fire. They tried to take our food from us when they gave us rations and, and introduce beef and lamb. And it's another log that you get taken off. You remove people from their country, it's another log you get taken off. So, you take enough logs from the fire and the fire goes out. Whereas what we're talking about, I guess, is in various ways, whether it's through teaching language, whether it's through educating our kids, whether it's, dancing, whether it's telling our kids stories of our homeland and the creation of the land, like we're tending to the fire, we're putting logs back on it, and then over time, it's like this, what we're doing is transmitting this fire from ourselves to our kids and then from them to their kids, and over time we teach them a little bit more language, connect them a little bit more with the country than perhaps we were, making sure that they know their family, where they come from, teaching them all their stories, like we're tending to the fire in our kids, and then the fire burns inside them and then gets passed on. So it's kind of this, fire's taught me, it's kind of great analogy for understanding our own culture and what we're doing with it, how it operates and how we can pass it on to our kids, but also, how we can, make the fire burn brighter in our own lives as well. So fire's a great teacher and it's a mentor, and we'd be wise to listen to it. Might open with a question.
It must be good if chefs and cooks actually have liquid smoke and they put it on food.
Yeah, you know what tastes better than liquid smoke? Actual smoke.
Smoke.
Any questions? Any comments? From down here, gentlemen.
Make sure you hold it close to your mouth.
Okay. Thanks. That was super interesting hearing, unpacking here, unpack the cultural dimension of fire. Really insightful, and such a beautiful metaphor at the end of the meaning of fire. Just you painted a beautiful metaphor. In southeast Australia, it's heavily altered and heavily regulated. And Uncle Rodney, I thought your remark about having to work within the heavily regulated environment in which we live was really insightful. You've got to work within it if you're going to change the world. Are there examples of where you're getting traction on cultural burning in this corner of the country?
Yeah, so if I just jump to outcomes, we've got over 30, potentially 38 burns planned that as practitioners we will implement at the end of summer. So once the season cools a little bit, we get a bit more moisture, country is wanting fire, we'll do that. Now, 5 years ago we couldn't have done that. I think we were doing around 2 or 3 fires a year. We've got all the regulatory requirements, so safety and the risk and liability, all that stuff, is still a critical mandatory box that we've got to tick. So fortunately, we've got our own tanker, so a fire truck, multiple fire vehicles suitable to industry, fire and forestry standard. And so, you know, we do that in a regulatory framework, as I said earlier, based on our values, so our cultural values, and then increasing private landowners wanting to commercially engage us as a people, and even through our risk framework, this is where we do family fires. We do more cultural stuff, so you'll get greater gender diversity and children participating, because they're tenures that allow a degree of discretion to do that. It's really hard to do that, you know, on our country in public estates or Crown land at the moment, but we aspire to be able to do that ultimately. So, you know, we'll hopefully, in a projection of effort, maybe doing an additional 10 fires each calendar year in the planning, and to make sure that we have the capacity to meet our capability now to do that sort of stuff. So for us, that's actually as much as we can do ourselves, but also, you know, we sensibly need to partner and collaborate with others, and you know, that's pretty inspiring.
Any others? You've got a few hands, which is wonderful to see.
Thank you for sharing. I've got a few questions, but I might just ask one to save space for other people. But my parents are farmers on Dadaroa land in northeast Victoria, and fires becoming more regular and catastrophic every year and very scary. And now just having, you know, a bushfire escape plan isn't enough, obviously. Do you have any recommendations or, insights about how to encourage farmers to be more sort of culturally aware about cultural burning, or how to be more collaborative, or what to do?
Yeah, from northeast Victoria, from Doodaroa country. Yeah, I'll link out with my friend Minda Murray. She'll be interested to talk to you.
Thank you.
But no, but in all seriousness, I think it's, look, thinking about Australia, like even now, spatially across Australia, there's a lot of, you know, talk and effort put into engaging governments and thinking about government's role in supporting, you know, cultural burning or hazard reduction kind of more generally. But if you look at, like, spatially across Australia and look at the land tenure of Australia, the two big land managers in this country are agriculturalists and Aboriginal people. I mean, they're the two, more than, you know, it's like 80-something% of Australia, the Australian land mass, is managed by those two groups. So any positive outcomes in managing the land better is going to need to be done by bringing those two groups together. And I hold hope that one day, you know, hopefully not too distant from in the future from now, because increasingly through the work I come across you know, pastoralists, farmers, you know, non-Indigenous landowners that are just so hungry to engage with Aboriginal people, to find better ways of looking after the environment. And so, like, I guess it's such a big thing, but I think we kind of need to think about, like, on the scale of you know, the Hawke government kind of accord that existed between, you know, farmers and greenies and the birth of land care and all that kind of thing. I think we're on the cusp of doing something like that, but I think all that stuff really can happen at the local level and the regional level now. If that's something that you want to do, I'd say just sort of, find the right groups in that area, reach out, and if there's no one to contact your local member. Talk to your local member, seriously. They listen to well, good ones anyway, listen to their constituents. And if that's something that your family or other kind of landowners in the region are really interested in, get in contact with the local member and say you want to explore those opportunities, and put it on them, because that's their job.
I just wanted to add to that. I think this idea around we've got to normalise this. So, you know, how can we use simplistic or just simpler phrasing around, you know, I might emotionally, culturally want to give fire, but country needs fire. So then it's rethinking or reframing what needs to happen. And if now fire's absence from the landscape and I look at it and I see materials that are combustionable because they're dry, culture, that's dirty country. And then other people, they just can't connect. So how do we help each other better understand what we visually see and that country's dirty, it's combustionable, it's no sensible, easy use for biodiversity, health and ecosystem function. So now do you give fire? Yes, of course you give fire. And you very subtly modify that vegetation's presence and usefulness for habitat for country. So, you know, we can similarly try and describe how we can connect in the mind to that and start giving fire to country, to what I framed earlier. If we can have multiple plumes of smoke, you know, that's going to be absolutely beautiful. And for future generations, when they see that, you know, oh goodness, I feel safe. You know, this whole notion of how catastrophic fires work. And you know, we haven't got enough time left to get into it, but fire moves in two manners. That there's connectivity of fuels. You know, so we take that away. Okay, there's a connection of the fuels. And what we see with catastrophic events is there's the projection of lit fuels called spotting. And the wind, and they're projected, you know, sometimes multiple kilometres in front of fires. That's the catastrophic stuff. But if we're careful and created lower hazard country, these burnt patches, you know, you think of it like a quilt, burnt patches all over country. When the catastrophic events come and they project that ember, statistically, probability, and we would want this, they land in an area that we've been tending country, less connection of fuels, less risk and volatility that fire will continue. And that's cultural fire, where you need these multiple patches of burnt landscape, and that's what mosaic is. You need multiple. And every year, every month, we're burning to break up the connectivity of landscape and its fuels will potentially be safer as people.
I think we're at time, but yeah, maybe just finishing with you, Anka, a final thought, a final reflection from this discussion, looking to the future or where we're at now. What's a final thought to give our guests to, you know, walk away with?
I really liked your suggestion before. Like, you know, hopefully we're good at leading our mobs, and you know, we get to this place of being able to describe what that is, and be able to present our mind in documentation. And then it's more consistently being able to read and understood. But I think talk to other forms of leaders, regulators, authority, your local members, things like that. Show an interest or, you know, heart on your sleeve that you support what your local mob is doing. And then I think we just have a greater effort of contribution to trying to get actions and outcomes.
I travelled down here yesterday from Western New South Wales, flew Dubbo to Sydney and then Sydney down here. And on the Sydney to Melbourne flow, you fly over the alpine areas, and about halfway along the flight, so it would have been probably quite close to, you know, over Doodaroa country, around sort of that Tumut down to Albury region. There's a lot of big lakes and stuff, that big dams that are all through there. And as I was flying over, there was this one kind of mountain range, and it had been lit up, and it was just this, you know, not just one line of fire, but multiple lines of fire coming down sort of on the ridges and whatnot. And you could see all this beautiful white smoke coming up from, and I was looking out the window and I looked at it and I was like, that is absolutely beautiful. You know, and that's the kind of place that we need to get to as a country and as a society of people, to know good fire, to see good fire, and to, you know, welcome it and love it and really, really adore it. So I'll leave it there. Thank you all so much. This has been a wonderful discussion. Please join me in thanking Uncle Rodney as well.